Assalamu alaikum, ahlan wa sahlan, hello and welcome to Literary Conversations Across Borders. This is the first in a series of discussions bringing together prominent Emiratis and top international writers and thinkers on topics that matter in the world today. My name is Julia Wheeler and I'm delighted to chair this inaugural discussion entitled How Will the Events of 2020 Change the Course of History? To discuss that question and bring their perspective to it, I'm joined by the Indian writer, intellectual and Member of Parliament, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and His Excellency Zaki Nusseibeh, Minister of State at the UAE's Office of Cultural Diplomacy. I'm in the United Kingdom. Shashi, you are in India, in Delhi, and Zaki, you're in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome. I think it's important perhaps to start by acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances in which we find ourselves talking to one another. And I wonder if I can ask you, Shashi, first to sort of look outside your window, as it were, and give us your perspective and your sense of where your country is with the pandemic, where you are in lockdown, and really a sense of the mood.
The mood is mixed, Julia, and I must say that it's very difficult for us to be entirely complacent. There was a time when people were saying we dodged the bullet. There were some real fears at one point that we could have literally hundreds of millions of infections in India. The famous Spanish flu of 1918-19 killed 50 million people, and a very large chunk of them were Indians. So there was this fear that something like that could replicate. It hasn't happened. We are still behind the US and Brazil in terms of numbers, but the numbers seem to be going up daily. Here in Delhi, for example, we actually have each day beating the previous day's record for the largest number of confirmed infections in a single day. At the same time, we are anxious, we're cooperating, we are following the mortality rate, which is blissfully not too high in India, and that's a source of some relief. But we're all concerned, naturally, that if the number of infections keeps increasing, that we may find ourselves unable to cope in terms of our healthcare infrastructure nationwide. On top of that, the lockdown has taken a huge toll on the economy. Unemployment is now at an all-time record level. I think the official figures are about 27% of the workforce is today unemployed. It was 7, which is bad enough. It was the worst in 46 years at 7%, but at 27, it's just broken all records. And some people say the real figure may even be higher. We've had the human tragedy of migrant workers abandoning our cities and trudging home on the abandoned highways to their villages, some perishing on the way. So there have been a lot of human tragedies, a lot of suffering, particularly the poor and the vulnerable. So there's no question we're not only not out of the woods, but as tomorrow is the last day of the 4th phase of the lockdown that was instituted initially on the 24th of March, we are looking at a country very much in the grips of uncertainty, of a sort of mega shock that has hit the economy, that has hit the people, particularly the poor and the vulnerable, and that is at the same time leaving open a number of serious questions about how the pandemic itself might go.
Thank you. Zaki, I wonder if you'd paint us a picture of where you are in the UAE.
Well, we are fortunately in a better mood in the United Arab Emirates than the one in India, and we share the suffering and deprivations that India and its people have to go through even now. I am in Abu Dhabi, as you know, and The United Arab Emirates is truly a cosmopolitan center, a hub of 9 million people, but we have 200 different nationalities with different cultures who live working together in an economy that is truly interlocked with the world economy. And therefore, when this virulent epidemic started spreading throughout the world, it was an extraordinary experience for all of us. The initial phase, I believe, would have been one of disbelief, but very quickly the government moved in order to institute a number of measures towards mitigating the effects of the epidemic. And we were able, in order to start these measures early on, we were lucky in that our economy was ready to move into the kind of digital platforms that we are using today for our conversation. It's a remarkable virtual world that has been made possible in the UAE by the installation early on of advanced intelligence and communication infrastructures. And I believe the government was able to gain the trust of our people, both expatriate and national, and that was very important. So I would say the first mood was a mood of disbelief, perhaps, and a strange wonder about what was happening. People you could still see going a lot to the beaches initially, walking along the streets, going into the malls. But very soon, quite strict but intelligent kind of lockdowns were installed according to the region, to the sector of a city, of an urban development, of workers' living quarters. And our people did respond to those measures. And we are moving today, and we have started already 2 days ago, we are moving today into the second phase of our mitigating the effects of this epidemic. Now, I must say it was quite a weird experience for us to feel that for the first time in my living memory anyway, we were going through these traumatic experiences at the same time with almost everybody else on this earth. That included the very large number of siblings, children, grandchildren I have spread throughout the globe, in New York and in London and in Jerusalem and in Amman and in Paris and in London. And there was some comfort in being able to come closer to each other by using those new apps that enable our conversations. But even now, as we move into the second phase, of course, where gradually the people will go back to their offices, malls have opened up, people are allowed to move, but always following strict regulations of social distancing and wearing a mask. I believe that we are beginning gradually to feel less the onerous fear that came into our homes when we were first faced by this terrible, virulent epidemic that came on us unawares.
Zaki, you touch on the changes in business, and Shashi, you talked about the economy. I wonder, Shashi, what do you think this means in terms of the structure of our economies, both within countries, but also the links between those economies?
Well, I mean, that's a wholly different question, and one which is understandably agitating some people, because we have to accept that the way things are going at the moment, it's very clear that the economies of every country have been affected, because every country has had to restrict economic activity to a greater or lesser degree. With economies ravaged, unemployment spiking, and public debt skyrocketing, no economy has come out unscathed from this coronavirus and the measures taken to cope with it. That applies, I think, to all of us. And there's obviously, as a result, a fair amount of uncertainty. I think the IMF estimates, the International Monetary Fund, that over 170 countries will experience negative per capita income growth. I mean, we might be in for a period that will remind people of the Great Depression of the 1930s. And unemployment is already hitting highs everywhere. We're looking at no doubt in my mind that a significantly large number of people will be pushed into poverty, whereas since 1990, the world story has been of people rising above the poverty line every year in India, in China, in Africa. But now I think we're going to be seeing people dropping back below the poverty line. There are real questions now about the principles underlying tariff-free trade. Is that going to continue? Flow of capital, investments, the supply chains that have linked countries together, you know, with one part of something being manufactured in China and something else being manufactured in Malaysia and the whole thing being assembled in Thailand and shipped to the US and sold there. That kind of world, is that going to be sustainable at a time when countries are talking about moving manufacturing closer home and rebuilding their economies? International travel is simply not what it used to be, and it's going to be a long time, I think, before it actually recovers. There's real talk of the end of neoliberalism, with governments playing a more active role in the economy. The fashion for 30 years was the other direction, ever since Margaret Thatcher's election in 1979 and Ronald Reagan's in 1980. We've seen a world in which the economic mantras were all about government getting out of the economy and more private sector and all that. Suddenly, people are beginning to feel the need for more public investment in health, more protections for labor markets, more protection for the weak and the insecure, more redistribution, protections for the elderly in a number of Western countries. All of these issues have come up. So I would say that we're going to see a huge amount of rethinking. I'm not coming to conclusions yet, but all these questions are on the table. And let's face it, there's going to be real talk of what people are already referring to as de-globalization, right? Because you've got this undoubted fact that the world's goods trade is going to shrink easily by up to a third this year. All the trading countries have seen their worst decline since records began to be kept. And others are going to say, do we want to be dependent on other countries, on China, on other countries generally for our supplies? There's a real risk of trade barriers going up, and many people are talking about more self-reliance, more protectionism, multinational corporations coming under pressure to relocate closer to home. I gather the Japanese have actually given a $2 billion fund for Japanese companies to come out of China and come back to Japan. And another $250,000 for those who come out of China but not go to Japan because they can't run their business viably. They can go to another country, but just coming out of China is now being subsidized. Is there going to be an economic decoupling from China? All of these questions, I think, are up there. I don't want to hazard a guess, but the very fact that these questions are being asked when they would have been seen as unthinkable questions just a few years ago suggests to me that we are in for a major structural shakeup of the world economy and national economies.
Let me pull out a thread from what you said and ask Zaki. I mean, the United Arab Emirates has always prided itself on being hugely open, and a lot of the economy is built on guest workers and so on. How concerned are you that that can continue, and what's the government's thinking there?
Undoubtedly. Sorry.
For Zaki.
I agree with my friend Shashi that we are right now passing an incredible period that is seeing major changing trends in the world economic structure, but also in the arena of international relationships. Now, we in the United Arab Emirates, of course, have built our prosperity and our development and our progress on being an open society that has welcomed 8 million expatriates to come and work in our economy and to be part of this success story that the Emirates have become over the last 50 years. Now, I believe we are at a crossroads. I agree with Shashi that all these questions that he put on the table are important questions that we have to look at and investigate and see how we can move forward on the different fronts. But we in the Emirates continue to believe very strongly in the need for the international community to come and work together in resolving those issues that are coming on the table. Now, of course, our own economy has suffered a major shock. I mean, it's the kind of activities that we had based on services, on tourism, being a logistic hub that works in the field of international trade to a large part of the world. All of this has come under severe pressure, and the government has already set up a number of working groups in order to look into these different challenges and view them as opportunities, as unique opportunities that will enable us to see where we could move next, into which sectors we should make our priority investments, how we can move forward. And I am optimistic as to the ability of our government to do this. But at the same time, we still believe strongly in our need to help the international community around us. The Emirates, which has always been in the forefront of international aid donors, continued even under this epidemic to help all those countries that needed help around us. We've sent during the epidemic major equipment and medications to more than 50 countries across the globe without any differences to their race or to that country being a friend or not. And at the same time, we continue to cooperate with the international aid organizations. You know that in Dubai, we have a basic logistics hub that channels something like 85% of the World Health Organization's supplies to the globe in terms of PPE and in terms of medicines. We continue to do this, and we believe as we come to this crossroads, we will find, as Shashi said, for instance, the United Nations foresees that there could be something like 250 million persons across the globe pushed into starvation or abject poverty. We need to see how we can help them. So for me and for the UAE, our viewpoint from the UAE is, as we look at this restructuring of the world economy, we need to think together how we could work together. Obviously, in certain areas where the chains of supply have to be rethought, in certain areas where, for instance, our food security has to be prioritized and more investments put into it. But at the same time, we continue to work for the integration of this world economy that, after all, has brought prosperity to hundreds of millions of people across the globe. Globalization has had its successes and it has had its weaknesses, and I believe the road forward must be on focusing how we can make this globalization less toxic to those sectors of societies that it left behind.
So you're very much about more cooperation, and yet other countries are thinking in a different way. And Shashi, let me bring you in here. President Trump has said that he is terminating his relationship with the WHO, the World Health Organization. And I know that you have direct experience from your time at the UN of that interrelationship between these supranational organizations and the countries themselves. And indeed, your election to potentially become Secretary General of the United Nations was, let me paraphrase, partly scuppered because the US did not want a strong Secretary General. That must be a concern, isn't it?
Well, it's it's paradoxical that you have Mr. Trump demanding that the WHO stand up to China when all the big powers have historically not wanted any of the UN agencies to have the independence and autonomy to stand up to them. The actual truth is the UN system has been designed as an instrument of member states. And the powerful member states in every country, whether it's the Security Council of the UN, whether it's on the ILO or the WHO's governing bodies, whether it's the donors of UNICEF. I mean, in every case, the powerful countries expect to be listened to by the secretariats and the executive employees. Now, I happen to agree with the principle that an organization like WHO needs a certain degree of authority. For example, I've heard from very reliable sources that very early in January, the WHO wanted to send a team to look for themselves to Wuhan, and they were denied visas by the Chinese. Now, if this is true, and I have no reason to believe it's not true, I've heard it from reputable sources, then it's simply the way these agencies are set up. Member states have the right to refuse them visas to come if they don't want to come. Perhaps on some issues, and international public health is clearly a compelling issue, particularly for us to face at this time, there should be an understanding amongst all member states, agreed in writing, that independent agencies will be allowed to travel and see situations for themselves and judge for themselves, and that member states shall not deny them permission to travel. That's one example. Another possibility could be, for example, for member states to agree that the executive heads of these agencies will have a single non-renewable term of, let's say, 6 years or 7 years, rather than successive terms permitting re-election, which makes them much more beholden to the powerful states who could prevent their re-election. All of these are things that member states must do. It's not something that the executives in an organization like WHO can decide for themselves. I do worry about multilateralism and global organizations because I fear that the mentality of these increasingly hyper-nationalist member states saying, in the case of Mr. Trump, one of his slogans is openly America first, that this is such a big departure from the philosophical principle that underlay the establishment of all these organizations in the wake of World War II, when countries said we must cooperate, we must sacrifice a little bit of our self-interest in order to work collectively for the shared interests of humanity. And that was the logic behind multilateralism. And I'm sorry to see that at a time when this sort of crisis ought to have brought us closer together, where we should be saying that, listen, we need to be better multilateralists, so the whole world could have been warned in time and we could have taken better steps to prepare. Instead, you have the US leaving WHO, which is, I think, a genuine tragedy. They're WHO's biggest donor, $450 million last year, which will suddenly dry up and not be available for international public health causes. And for my concern about the capacity of global institutions to be able to function effectively. Because if we see an unraveling of the system that was set up after 1945, we will all be losers, in my view. And you know, there's so much of what we do, everything from how planes fly across the world to how international health standards are maintained and so on, that are actually the result of global systems, global treaties, an international system that has worked for 75 years. It's, to my mind, extremely worrying that countries seem willing to jettison it because of short-term pique.
We've talked macro, let's bring it down to micro and talk about education, Zaki. There's been huge disruption to education, and I think, you know, many households in all three of the countries in which we're speaking have been touched by that, either by being parents, by being students, by, you know, as Zaki, as you say, you know, you've been talking to your grandchildren all over the world, and it's a situation that many countries have shared. You are very much involved in the setting up of the Sorbonne University in Abu Dhabi. You're chair of its trustees. What sense do you have, really, of how education in the future is going to have to look as a result of this pandemic?
I think, Julia, this is one of the major questions we have to deal with as we move into the post-COVID-19 world, and that may take some time. Let us not forget this, because even as we lift some of those shutdown constraints, we could still see the coming of a second wave or the coming of a mutated genre of a virus that could force certain countries or certain parts to go back to a policy of constraint. And education is at the heart of our future, because we are, as a country, we are a country of young people. The average age is of 30, and therefore we are deeply committed to give our youth the opportunities and the chances for a good education that could train them and equip them to face the challenges of the 21st century. Now, in the UAE, again, we were fortunate that the infrastructures that we have put into place, information and technology, enabled all of our schools and our universities to immediately move into an e-learning mode, using the digital video conferencing in order to bring the students together and give them the courses that they need. Even the commencement celebrations now are being given virtually. We are to attend the graduation of a major class of university students in Al Ain on Tuesday, again through this virtual digital world. The Sorbonne University in Abu Dhabi, I know, was able to move into this e-learning process faster and more effectively than our mother university in Paris, because we did have this system in place. But I know that this teaching has put enormous pressure on our parents. I know through my grandchildren that mothers and fathers, their fathers and mothers suddenly found themselves bound to their homes, trying to give this education to their children. I know that children also need a school environment in which they can socialize with their friends and where they can learn together and where they can also have other activities together. But I believe that we will, for the coming future, have to focus on using the internet, using video conferencing, developing our artificial intelligence infrastructure, really trying to develop a technology that can see us through this, as well as any future crises that we may have to face. Education is at the heart of the future prosperity of the globe, not only of our society, but of all societies. And therefore, I feel we need to have governments truly focus, like ours is doing, on giving the best opportunities for children to continue their education in spite of these lockdown constraints that are imposed upon us.
So let's bring in the audience here, because we have a poll connected to this subject, and there may well be children watching. If you can click on yes or no, really, in answer to this question, everyone who's watching. The question is, will the future generation lose their emotional intelligence and their ability to communicate as a result of online learning? Will the future generation lose their emotional intelligence and their ability to communicate as a result of online learning? It's multiple choice. Click yes or no on your screens. I'm afraid, Zaki and Shashi, that you are unable to vote as participants in it, but we'll perhaps get your idea. So I am going to count down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Voting is now closed, and I wonder whether we can see what the answer to that is. So 60% of people think yes, the future generation will lose their emotional intelligence and their ability to communicate as a result of online learning, and 40% think no. Shashi, what's your reaction to that?
I actually share that reaction, I have to say, Julie. I think that, you know, I really respect Zaki's point about online education, but I've never seen online education as a substitute for the real thing, only as a complement or a supplement. I genuinely believe that there is no substitute for the actual experience of being in a classroom, surrounded by people, interacting with your teachers, interacting with your fellow students, getting information for yourself, bouncing it off others, arguing a point. There is a whole experience to education that is not about sitting and staring at a screen alone. And I do believe that while online education can be helpful, it sort of can replace, if you like, what used to be called in India the tuition teacher, who made up for what you hadn't understood inside the classroom. But I think that it really is only a small aspect of education. Education is about the growth of the entire human personality. The student in the classroom, whether at school or at college, is not just learning what the teacher is talking about, not just learning what the textbook says, but learning how to learn, learning how to interrelate with others, and as your poll question asked, learning emotional intelligence to go along with the sharpening of his or her intellectual intelligence. And I think that all of that is lost out in this headlong rush to emphasize online education and e-learning. I think it should be a small part, a complement, but it should never be an alternative to the classroom experience. And I'm told already that a number of high school seniors in America, for example, are actually asking for deferred university admission or taking gap years because they don't really want to pay handsomely for a high quality university degree that they're going to get from sitting in front of a screen. They really want to wait until they can experience the campus. And I think that shows that both parents and students understand the value of a real hands-on learning experience.
You use the phrase emotional intelligence then, and I want to bring things round to think about politics and leadership, if I may. It won't have dodged your attention that some of the countries, many of the countries that are handling this crisis in a, let's say, at the moment, seemingly more successful way, are led by women. And far be it from me to say to you two gentlemen that women are doing this better. That's not what I want to say. But I wonder whether the behaviour, if you like, that is more associated with the female gender is proving useful in this context. And I wonder whether we will want, demand, ask for a different sort of leadership. Shashi?
Well, I certainly admire and applaud the large numbers of women leaders. At least 5 or 6 have achieved particular worldwide recognition for their exemplary leadership. And the extraordinary performance of New Zealand, which I think is down to 1 infected case in the entire country today, has been singled out for particular praise, and it's led by a young woman prime minister. So whether it's their emotional intelligence, whether it's their instinctive priority on life and nurturing, whether it's at the same time an ability to cut through the irrelevancies and focus on what's really essential, which all of these qualities are important, both for being an effective woman in the world and being an effective political leader. So I think that all of those could possibly well justify that praise. But I would still like to hesitate a little bit and say that I don't think gender alone determines either your success or your failure or your record in office. It's a happy coincidence, and it may be that there are some extra advantages, particularly in the area of emotional intelligence, that women leaders have, but there's no particular reason why male leaders should take the dumb decisions some of them have taken. I won't name names, but I think we all know from our headlines that some male leaders have not exactly distinguished themselves with some of their political choices during the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns in their countries. And therefore, whether it's because men are a little too sure of themselves and women are a little more willing to adjust to other things, I hesitate to generalize about genders. But I think there are effective men and ineffective women, even if the current pattern suggests the opposite is more true.
Zaki, there are some suggestions as well that actually, by definition, having women leaders or women in the room just changes the group think, really, just broadens the ideas that are coming in. Does that resonate with you, Zaki?
Well, certainly, yes. But let me first react to Shashi's views on emotional intelligence and education. And I really want to say that I will not argue, of course, against the superiority of an option where our children can go to schools physically and interact with their environment. But we must now remember that we are passing through a pandemic that has forced us to change our thinking. This pandemic has been forewarned by health experts for the last several decades. And yet it took us unawares. We had to face it using the tools, as one health expert said, of the 14th century in order to fight a 21st century virus. And therefore, we need to be able to think out of the box. So it's not a question of an option between what is ideal and what is not. It is an option of preparing ourselves from today in order to move into uncharted territory, including e-learning, when it is necessary, because we don't know what challenges the future can bring to us. And of course, on the question of the United Nations and its organizations, we believe in the UAE in the importance of supporting those international organizations. I wish that Shashi did succeed as a Secretary General, because what is needed is the reinvigoration of these institutions. You know, they are as strong, as Shashi said, as the member states who allow them to work, but they did save us from major power confrontations, and we do need them as we move into the future. Now, as we move into the question of the empowerment of women, you find in me, but also in our government, the strongest of supporters for women empowerment. I absolutely believe that they bring new thinking and new attitudes to any room, whether political or military or social or economic. We have half the members of our National Assembly, very intelligent women. We have more graduates from universities, women graduates than men. We have senior ministers. We have Rhodes Scholars now that have come back and taken positions of authority. As you know, our permanent representative at the UN is my daughter, and I feel very proud of her contribution exactly towards reforming those international organizations that we do need as we move into the future. So yes, by all means, we need women to be empowered globally. In the UAE, of course, Sheikha Fatma bint Mbarak has been active since the 60s, I would say, working with Sheikh Zayed, the founding father, in order to make sure that women are empowered so as to contribute to the success of this society. And I believe that the prosperity of the UAE is linked to a large part to the fact that it has empowered from early days its women to become part of the social life in the country.
Thank you. Let's talk about the climate. We'll talk about climate change, because this has been sort of ironically knocked off the top of the agenda, but actually pollution around the world because of less industry, fewer flights, etc., has done the climate a favour. It's as simple as that, isn't it? Done climate change a favour, done the environment a favour. So we have another poll that I'd love everybody to get involved in, and the question on this second poll is: can the world sustain the measured improvement in reduced greenhouse gases experienced over the past 3 months? Can the world sustain the measured improvement in reduced greenhouse gases experienced over the last 3 months? Again, it's a yes or a no, simple as that, no half measures. Can the world sustain the measured improvement in reduced greenhouse gases experienced over the last 3 months? I'm only going to give you 5 seconds this time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the answer, interesting, closer than I thought actually. So 45% of people think that yes, the world can sustain the measured improvement in reduced greenhouse gases from the last 3 months. 55% think no. Shashi, are you in agreement this time?
Once again, I'm going along with the majority, but for a purely realistic reason. I actually want us to be able to sustain this. I suffer from the terrible air pollution in Delhi, which is where Parliament is located in India. We were the world's worst city in terms of air pollution for the last 25 years or so. Well, we overtook Beijing. We were second to Beijing and overtook them after the Beijing Olympics when they really cleaned up their air. But we have a terrible situation where the World Health Organization talks about the ideal air quality index peaking at 25, and Delhi was routinely above 300 every day, or for more than 250 days of the year, it was over 300. Suddenly, because of the lockdown, it came down dramatically. Most days it's below 50, sometimes below 30. And on one blissful day, after a spurt of rain, it actually came down to 7, which is sheer bliss. So I love that. I love the fact that I can see the blue skies and see the wispy clouds. There are Indians writing in from places in Punjab where they can see the Himalayas for the first time in a generation or two. So all of this is wonderful. But the reason I support the majority when they say it's not sustainable is because it has been made possible by an extraordinary level of suspension of economic activity. We are looking at a level of non-emissions because of not manufacturing, no cars or fewer cars on the roads, fewer vehicles. No normal economic activity has been allowed to take place in most of the world. The moment we start seeing resumption in India, we're already resuming in many places, and that's going to accelerate. The same in the US, the same in Europe and Britain. I think you're going to find that the numbers will inevitably climb up. But it's a reminder. It's a reminder that nature has healed itself during these months and that we are doing Mother Nature a lot of damage. And if it can therefore serve to encourage us to more actively explore the conditions that will bring back something of the kind of clean environment we've been able to have. If, for example, by now having a greater political impetus for clean air, for cutting back on coal-fired and thermal plants, for investing in alternative energy, creating tax breaks for alternative energy. If we can start doing all of that more because we have tasted what the future could be like and we like it, that could then change that around. But in the short term, resumption of normal economic activity will mean that the majority is right. We will not be able to sustain this improvement.
Zaki, what do you think we can take with us from this sort of pause environmentally? What will we effectively be able to do? What's realistic?
Well, Julia, I must confess from the outset that I am by nature an optimist. I am an optimist because I do not believe that the veer of civilization hides below it a violent and evil man, because I do not believe that we will continue to make the same mistakes that were made in the past, but that we will learn as we go through the different experiences, because I believe we will not repeat making the same mistakes. So we will move into the future, I believe, with a positive force that has shown us new vistas, new possibilities. And let me just conclude by telling you what my grandchild says about this, and including the climate. You know, he's in lockdown in New York. He has just been out to the park, Central Park, and he saw all these creatures scurrying around the park. And he commented by saying, you know, I'm so glad that this is happening, because it's making those creatures come around us, because it's making our breathing air better for us. But I am sorry that it has to happen to us at the expense of so many people suffering. I wish that we could become better custodians of this earth. And I believe that we can become better custodians of this earth, that we can learn from this crisis that we are passing through if we use our experience in order to move forward and to rectify our mistakes, not to repeat them. And if we continue to work together as an international community in facing all those other issues that will face us, we haven't come even to mention the security issues around the earth, and you know, the conflict areas. The Secretary General has called for 2 months ago for a cessation of hostilities in all conflicts, and we supported that stand. We fully endorse it and we work for it. But it is unbelievable to think that we can continue engaging in regional conflict, that we can continue neglecting so many of the other issues that are facing us. You know that more than 1 million persons died over the last 4 months because of other communicable diseases, but they are preventable, like malaria, like tuberculosis, like HIV. So there are a whole host of issues that need to be looked at. I am an optimist, and I truly believe we can move from this experience forward and build on it in order to build a better world for our grandchildren.
Your grandson sounds terribly wise, Zaki. We've got some questions coming in. Sumaya asks, how does US power look in the near future? And what do you feel will be the world order post-COVID-19? Shashi.
That's a whole seminar or webinar in itself, isn't it? It's a vast topic, that second question. On the US, I think, the short term is actually not terribly meaningful because there's a major election coming up in November. And a lot will depend on the outcome of that election. I think that if President Trump wins, he's clearly going to double down on increasing isolationism, increasing protectionism, increasing belligerence about the rest of the world. He's made it very clear that the US is in things for itself, as it were. Even this business of trying to arrogate a certain amount of medicines and drugs and so on for itself from manufacturers elsewhere. American interests first are now going to be quite openly and blatantly what Mr. Trump is all about. And that will obviously give you a different answer for world order than if someone like Mr. Biden, who's been long associated with the traditional American approach to world order, were to come to power. So I think whatever we say about the US remains valid till November. And then we have to rethink once again. If Mr. Trump is back, then I think there's going to be a major there will be major consequences for the global order. Broadly speaking, I mentioned already the threat to multilateralism. And that, I think, is something that undoubtedly is on the cards. And many countries will have to rise above their own selfish interests to talk about the importance of actually reaffirming the great valuable achievements of multilateralism going back to 1945 onwards, with undoubted reforms and changes such as the ones we've already discussed when talking about WHO. In addition to that, I hope we don't completely throw out the globalization baby with the coronavirus bathwater. I mean, the truth is that globalization has done a lot of good, particularly for developing countries. It's helped them come out of the dire situation they were in after the Second World War and in the first decades after, and I'd like to see that continue. Many talk about the ascent of Asia. A country like the UAE has a lot of the good features and qualities that should help it rise. China, of course, has demonstrated very effective state capacity, even if it is currently in very bad odor because of the way it handled the virus, the origins and the initial spread of the virus. It is undoubtedly resilient economically and politically at home in ways that will make it a force to be reckoned with, whereas the US, unfortunately, is seen as a place that cannot be relied upon anymore to uphold the international order that it once created. And so if America first becomes America alone, then the US's leadership in the world is something that's going to disappear. And it's not impossible that China could strategically position itself as the new guarantor of global public goods in a more assertive and well-financed incarnation. Conversely, I've already talked about the risk of others decoupling more and more from China, so it could go the other way. And that's why we're speaking in an era of some uncertainty about all of these trends. I would finally say that, there are some real worries, not just for global order, but even for regional. People in Asia have not paid enough attention to the mess in Europe, where Europe was for a long time seen as the actual harbinger of closer integration of sovereign states working together in a common interest. Instead, it's collapsing. You have the Schengen visa, a border-free movement, already a victim to the pandemic. You're seeing limitations on the free movement of people, of goods, of services, of capital. There was a proposal by 9 pandemic hit governments in the Eurozone, led by Italy, Spain, and France, to have Corona bonds issued, combining securities from different European countries so that debt would not sit on any one country's balance sheet. But the so-called frugal four, led by Germany, well, Netherlands, Austria, and Finland, said, no, 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 we shouldn't have to subsidize the effectlessness financially of the rest of you. And so where is this great Europe experiment foundering at this moment? It sort of shows how when we've come under the pressure of this virus, a number of the trends to pull countries together have been seriously undermined. And I was struck by a statement by the Spanish Foreign Minister, Arantxa González, who said it's like we're all in the same boat. We've hit an unexpected iceberg, and now we are arguing about who gets first and second class tickets. That's the sort of quarrel going on in Europe, and it raises real questions about European solidarity. Is that going to work? And that, I think, is a larger question for other countries. Will more and more countries to know we have to look after ourselves now? We can't rely on international cooperation. That would really worry me. I think that we need a world in which we are able to look to the collective human interest much more than countries today seem to be doing.
And Zaki, you've said something along those lines already, so let me ask you another question. This is from Nitha. Do you see opportunities that could actually be beneficial, could crop up for the younger generation as a result of this?
Absolutely. I believe that we are passing through a transitional period which is obviously filled with worries, especially for our young generations, with the development of technology, with artificial intelligence, with the need to coexist with the pandemic that may be around us for a long time, with the worry about what kind of careers our young people could find. I believe this is the moment to begin again to start thinking out of the box and to focus exactly on those sectors that will be, in effect, the engines for tomorrow's economic prosperity, and to start training for those sectors. And there are many new possibilities opening up in artificial intelligence, in engineering. We have found through this crisis that our scientists, our researchers, our physicists, these are the important people that we need, our doctors, our frontline medical personnel. These are the kind of people we need. We have already in the UAE a number of entrepreneurs who are trying to use this new technology in order to find new openings, new niches in a market that is bound to rebound again, once again. So yes, I believe that young people do have an opportunity as long as they start thinking out of the box and investigating what best careers could they start preparing themselves for from today.
Let me ask you both the same question, and perhaps if you'd answer it just briefly, please, just 30 seconds or so, because we're almost at the end of time. Shashi, what do you see as the new normal?
I don't think there is a new normal. Right now, we have a new abnormal, which we're all living with, which is one of actually putting a number of our traditional activities on hold, not meeting people, not traveling, not conducting our normal lives. I think it's when the world returns to normal that we'll have to see if it is truly a new normal, whether we just go back to the way things were before the virus, or whether we've changed certain habits of human contact, of traveling less, of doing things more virtually, and so on. If that becomes a new pattern, then we can speak of a new normal. Right now, what we have is a new abnormal.
Zaki?
Well, I do not think, unfortunately, that we will be able to go back to the old normal. I mean, I know all of us are yearning for the comforts of our lives in the old normal, but I believe that for a number of years coming down the line, we will have to learn how to adapt and how to see opportunity in the new normal that we need to live with. I mean, simple things like social distancing, simple things like hygiene habits, simple things like changing some of our customs and habits. we need to be able to work with them and feel that this nevertheless gives us an opportunity to move forward with our life. We should not worry or focus too much about the possibility that the old comforts of the old normal may not be around with us for a long time to come.
Thank you both so much. Just before I hand over to Isabel Abu, I'd like to say my great thanks for really taking us around the world and into your living rooms, to take the discussion out, to bring it back to individuals. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here for this inaugural event. Thank you to everybody for
Thank you, Julia, for your...
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your able conduct of this conversation.
Thank you, and thank you, Shashi, also.
There's so many thanks going on. I would just like to say thank you to everybody for and for voting, for asking questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get through all of them. There were over 200 questions, so thanks for that engagement. And let me please hand over now to the CEO of the Emirates Literature Foundation, Isabel Abu.
Hello, everyone, and I've been captivated by today's session. On behalf of us all, thank you so much to our brilliant speakers, Your Excellency Zaki Nusseibeh and Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for your wise thoughts and opinions on today's big questions. Thank you also to Julia Wheeler for your expert ability to guide us today's talk on an amazing journey. The foundation team, you have been fantastic at picking up new digital skills at the speed of light. Shukran. This most special initiative would never have happened without the tremendous support of the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy and His Excellency Zaki Nusseibeh. A heartfelt thank you. It started life as a travelling project. However, given the current global pandemic, Literary Conversations Across Borders has magically transformed into something, I believe, even better. To the 3,000 plus people from more than 46 countries around the world who've invited us into their homes today, thank you. And you've asked searching questions, and I'm really sorry we haven't been able to answer them all, but we will relish looking at them all and wondering what the answers could have been. You've helped us realize a dream of having a two-way dialogue across so many borders. Please do join us next Saturday, 6th of June, when Dr. Jane Goodall, the renowned primatologist and anthropologist, and Her Excellency Miriam El-Maheri, the UAE Minister of State for Food Technology, will join together to discuss sustainability and food security in these strange times. Finally, thank you, each and every one of you, and please stay well. We are sending best wishes from the United Arab Emirates to our fellow human beings across borders, across the world. Thank you.